Hey everybody, it's Kneecap here, and in this video I have the top 10 dungeons all time in World of Warcraft across all expansions, according to me, so yes, a bit subjective. But first, if you could go ahead and click subscribe or like on the video, that helps me fight the YouTube algorithm. Right, let's go ahead and get started into this top 10 list. So I did say it was subjective, and it is. However, I did do a little bit of a ranking here. So I went through every single dungeon ever made, and I gave them each a ranking on 1 to 5 on 3 different categories, averaged those 3 categories out, and gave it a final score. So the categories were fun. Number 1, the fun that I had in the dungeon, the layout and design. I did not include artwork in this because I think that gives an unfair advantage to the newer dungeons, and like memorable bosses slash activities. So it could be like a new mechanic on a boss, or it could be like a cool thing you have to do to open a door, or some secret thing you have to do in a dungeon, or just some neat thing that you have to do. And those are the things that I value in dungeons, and these are the rankings I came up with. I also did a worst 10 dungeons using the same exact method, worst 10 dungeons, and you can check that out if you like. Well, let's go ahead and get started with the top 10 dungeons. I do have a little caveat to start here, and so technically a number 11, I suppose. But this one will probably be in the top 10. But Talzavesh, the new dungeon that will be coming out in 9.1, the new Mega Dungeon. You will find a commonality between a lot of these dungeons, and Talzavesh kind of sets that up. And this is a really, really cool looking dungeon. I have watched many videos on it, although I haven't done it myself. If I had done it myself on the PTR and it was really great, I might have just put it in. But based on the boss fights, very unique encounters in this dungeon, very high quality dungeon, and I imagine it would be my top 10 if it was on the live servers already. So special shout out to Talzavesh. Coming in at number 10, we have probably the most controversial one, maybe other people like it, but it's The Other Side from this expansion. So the to be perfectly clear, I had a lot of tie scores based on my score system for number 10. And The Other Side, I just put it in there because I think it's a very well made dungeon, and I did want to give some props to Shadowlands because I think the dungeons are well made, even though they aren't exceptional. But The Other Side is a pretty good dungeon that exists in here. It's good because it has these different wings. People tend to like those in their dungeons to where it's not all the same thing all the time. And so I also like that. And then you got Hakar, who's really cool. You got some gnome stuff going on with the Mana Storms, which is always, everyone seems to enjoy those fights. The final boss is really cool. You know, the Ardenweld side isn't the coolest in that, whatever. And some of the runbacks are a bit annoying. And that's why otherwise it probably would be solidly in the top 10. If the teleports back from the end bosses were instant, basically, and maybe the Ardenwell boss was really, really, really cool because it's decent, don't get me wrong, but if it was top notch cool, maybe it would just be way higher even. So special shout out to The Other Side. Again, there's a lot of dungeons tied for number 10, so just kind of giving a tiebreaker to one of the newer dungeons because this is filled with a lot of the older dungeons, frankly. Coming in at number 9, we have Oldham. Oldham was such a great dungeon back in the day. This is a huge dungeon, right? It's a mega dungeon, much like Talzavesh, just in the old school way. There's a lot of quests here. The quests have been revamped over time. In full disclosure, dungeons that have been revamped, I factor in the old version of them and the new version of them. So a lot of times the old version might carry, but the new version better still be pretty decent, or else it probably isn't going to be on the list. So Oldham, I really loved having to take the discs and then eventually go to Oldham, or like the doors of Oldham. But now since Oldham's open already, it's not like a mystery anymore. They kind of reworked how the quest works. It's still such a great dungeon. You have the staff that you have to put in to open the door to the maiden type fight. You have trogs. You have all these different types of encounters. You have the earthen. You have trogs. You have animals. You have dark iron dwarves. All kinds of cool things in Oldham. This was such a blast run when I was actually playing in vanilla. I ran this multiple times to get all the quests done. And of course I was a noob, so I didn't have them all at once. I ran it multiple times when I was a noob. I still enjoy running it when I'm leveling now. And I even farm this dungeon a lot because there's a lot of really rare items in it, which also, makes it a bit unique and adds some coolness factor to it, frankly. So coming at number 9, we have Oldham. If it wasn't so big and some of the animal stuff in there is a bit annoying and redundant, maybe it would have been even higher. Coming in at number 8, we have one that I think also maybe people might disagree with, and that's Sethic Halls from Burning Crusade. I actually really enjoy Sethic Halls. Now, this was hard because all of those four in the Arkandon area had very similar type scores, I would say. Not exactly the same, but very similar. And the Sethic Halls, however, happens to be my favorite. And what gives it the bonus for me is having the rare mount in it, which used to be Druid only, but now anybody can try to farm that mount. And then I actually really enjoy the last boss for this. At the time when it was new, it was actually quite interesting, quite hard. You had people really struggle, and even now, if you do a pug group, maybe not everybody has heirlooms on in the dungeon tool. People really struggle with getting out of line of sight for the big arcane explosion, and I love the last boss. Trinkets, trinkets. I absolutely love that for whatever reason. It's for me. The line is like the exterminator from Oldham. Like I just love that voice line with the trinkets from the final bird boss there, and I just really enjoy this dungeon a lot. There was cool mind control stuff with some of the totems and stuff. It's just generally a cool dungeon, frankly. Very, very linear, like most BC dungeons were, but I actually like that for layout too. So that probably gives it extra points as well. It's very easy to get back to the front. Let's say you're farming it, that counts too. So like I said, original gameplay when it came out, playing it when you are doing it like a looking for dungeon and nowadays, and then even if you are farming it, how easy is it or fun is it to farm if it has cool items in it? So Sethic Halls, number 8. Coming in at number 7, we have one that I think a lot of people might agree with, although they might forget about it, and that is the Oculus from Wrath of the Lich King expansion. So the Oculus, the most notable thing about this was you get to ride on these dragons, and you fight on the dragons as you go encounter to encounter, and then you actually fight the last boss on the dragon. This, of course, sets up the Malagos fight for the raid, and yeah, this was really cool. It was a bit of a group learning thing. Back then, people were a little bit more nice in dungeons. They didn't expect you to know everything right away. And so people would explain it to you if you didn't know what to do. For me, I wanted to make sure I tried out all the different dragons, so I knew all the different abilities. And I sincerely enjoy this dungeon so much. I enjoy the boss on the ring before the final boss, and I really enjoy the final boss. I think it's just an excellent encounter. And yeah, maybe it's a bit annoying if you don't know what to do in modern day, because maybe someone's not explaining it to you. But if you do know what to do, or you take the time to try to learn what to do yourself, it's actually still quite a fun dungeon to do because of that dragon aspect of it, of riding on a dragon in the dungeon. And of course, this is heavily carried by when it came out, it was like a one-of-a-kind thing. So number 7, the Oculus. Coming in at number 6, we have Grimatol. This is a very similar reason why it's here. Grimatol, the design is absolutely marvelous. If I could include artwork, I might make this even higher. Being a main dwarf character for most of my World of Warcraft experience, I really appreciate the dwarven architecture of like Ironforge. Well, Grimatol is actually even much better than that. Obviously, it's run down a little bit, but you can look down, you can look up and see some just marvelous architecture. But that doesn't even factor into this because, again, I'm not going by artwork. But the design of dungeon is great. You have, of course, the unique encounter of riding the dragon and doing a bombing run in the dungeon, which actually helps you in clearing the trash if you do it correctly. It's a bit easier to do now, but back in the day you really needed probably at least 4 of your group to know what they're doing on the bombing run to make it easy. And oh my gosh, if nobody did a good job or only one person did, it was really hard back in the day to get through it. But the bombing run was really cool. The first boss is actually still really fun, even on like replaying it as a veteran player, because it still can definitely kill you. It has an enrage at the end. It has a blitz that hurts a lot, and it can really destroy you. So it's actually still a fun boss. The final boss, it's also old god themed. The final boss is an old god. If your group doesn't kill that final boss fast enough, you get to see all the mechanics, and it's actually quite a fun dungeon boss. The middle couple bosses are a little bit more lackluster, but it's carried heavily by the encounter. And then I love old god stuff as well. For fun wise, I love dwarven stuff, and so it sets itself apart really in a lot of ways. And I'll always have a soft spot in my heart for Grimatol. And although I do hope they one day get rid of it, and I hope they make it a Dark Iron Dwarf city, I think that would be really cool. Coming in at number 5, we have Gnomeregan. Now, Gnomeregan has been changed a little bit. It is carried by the old Gnomeregan, the completely old. They didn't change it that much, but it's carried by the old Gnomeregan. And the new one isn't terrible either, frankly. So this is another kind of mega dungeon, right? It's a big dungeon with a lot of bosses in it. Some are now, pretty optional. You don't have to go through the whole thing if you don't want to. But it has a lot of bosses in it, a lot of different encounters, a lot of different things you could do, turn in the grime encrusted objects, so stuff like that in there. I think there's like an escort quest in there, at least it used to be. You had the punch card system to do that as well, which is also really cool. And so you had all kinds of like little things going into it. So like in the memorable / activities category, this is like, the highest rating, like a 5 because of that. The layout, it is a bit too obnoxiously big in some ways, although it is pretty densely populated while you're going. So you're not just running to run. Like that's honestly why BRD didn't make this list. Spoiler, BRD did not make the list, unfortunately, even though I love that dungeon. It's just sometimes there's running just to run. I don't like that. But I like big dungeons if you're constantly doing something. And Gnomeregan definitely fits that bill. So I really love Gnomeregan. I love all like the story and lore behind it as well. And it just ranks really high for me as a boss. And there's actually like cool secrets and stuff they've added to it, pet battles and stuff. But not even counting that, frankly, it still would be on my list. Coming in at number 4, we have a maybe modern version of Gnomeregan in Mechagon, another mega dungeon, the second mega dungeon that they ever made. And maybe Tesla should be here in the future in this spot or near it. But we have Mechagon. So Mechagon, you have to really, what you'll see with these mega dungeons, and Tesla should be the same way, is you have to divorce the Mythic Plus from the original dungeon. I haven't really had to say that yet because the only one I've done is the other side with Mythic Plus. You really have to change between Mythic Plus and the actual dungeon, because Mythic Plus is a whole nother faction of the game. Like what dungeons are best for Mythic Plus, that would be a whole nother video, frankly. So Mechagon, the original version of it, so you probably only ran this the first couple weeks or month or whatever it was, maybe even couple months, because there was an essence tied to it as well of doing like the hard mode or whatever. And so Mechagon is a really, really cool dungeon. It's a really, really well-made dungeon with a bunch of memorable bosses in there. It's set up perfectly. You have like the super DPS boss, which is what the fourth boss, I think, or maybe it's the third one, the one in the middle, or maybe it doesn't even matter what order you do them in. I am drawing a blank on that. For me, it's been a while since I've actually run this. And then you have the hard modes activated. Of course, hard modes are just cool in general by the aerial unit. And then you have like this cool mechanic with the dog where you're hiding behind the box. Of course, people found out you could cheese it, but it's still a cool mechanic. Yeah, it's just a really cool, well-made dungeon. The final boss is absolutely epic. The hard mode, if you haven't done the hard mode, I do suggest getting like 4 people with yourself and going and do the hard mode. First of all, there's like a mount you can get. Second of all, it's just a really cool encounter when you do the hard mode. And hard modes definitely count in this. That's memorable things, unique activities, and fun. All hard modes are all tied to that, and these hard modes are really good, so that gives it extra points, frankly. Coming in at number 3, we have the Return to Karzan. How could this not be high? Karzan is one of the most beloved raids in the game's history, and the Return to Kar is just a new take on Kar. It's it's the same dungeon, it's the same layout, it's the same instance, it's the same layout essentially. I spent way too much time in there trying to solve the Jennifer pet before it was solved. Just countless hours in Return to Karzan, and it's just a great dungeon. You don't get tired of it because it is so cool. It's so big. It's so epic. It is a mega dungeon. The fights are all cool. The opera is like a more modern take on the opera. It's more of a musical instead of an opera, right? With like Wicked and stuff. So it's just a really cool thing. All the new take with the chest room being all distorted. Then you have like the super alien fight at the end, which is totally random, but it was actually a really cool fight, especially when it was new. And yeah, I generally enjoy pretty much everything in Return to Kar. I can't really think of anything I don't enjoy. Again, it's just a callback, really. The Morose fight is the Morose fight. Really cool mounts, 2 cool mounts in there, which definitely gives it some cool and fun factor. Between Midnight and then the Ember Wren, I believe it is, from the Nightbane encounter there in Return to Kara. So All this stuff is really cool. When you add it all up together, I put it one mega dungeon ahead of Mechagon. I wonder where, if Telzavesh is really as cool as what it looks, I wonder if Telzavesh will be, it'll be around these other two mega dungeons, and hopefully for everyone's sake would actually be ahead of Return to Kara, because then you have a really cool dungeon. Coming in at number 2, and so we don't have anything that's even remotely new in the final 2 slots. At number 2, we actually have Deadmines. This one was hard for me because I have so much memorable stuff with it, and I had so much fun in there. It was just ranked super high. The layout's also not bad, frankly. It is a bit linear, which I like, right? I give points for linearness and not running around everywhere. Like Moradon, I gave a bad rank because you are just kind of running around. People generally get lost. Deadmines is pretty linear. You're in a cave, but the cave pretty much only goes one way once you're in there. The entrance to get to it's actually really cool as well, although that is a little bit meandering. It's actually cool that it's hidden inside a house. I would have never guessed that. Obviously, somebody had to show me when I was a noob. The fact that it's hidden inside of a building and you have to go through it is absolutely incredible in its own right. A lot of memorable things are. It's memorable, frankly, to fire the cannon the first time. It's memorable. Even when they first remade it, nowadays it's not that cool, but you can like get in the cannons at the start and shoot them. That's kind of cool. The remake of it isn't bad at all. It's still a good dungeon. It's not as good as the old one, but the old version definitely carries this. You had the Defias armor, which was absolutely amazing. You had all kinds of really cool weapons in there, frankly. You had Smite in the original one. Hey there, check out that noise. And of course, a lot of people have the toy for that now. Mr. Smite's Compass, I believe it is, or something like that. And yeah, the new one isn't nearly as good as the old one, but the new one would just be like a regular dungeon. It would have been like a 3 on a scale of 5 on average. But the original one was so good and so memorable for me. And this one is very subjective because it was like the first dungeon I ever ran. So it's going to be super high rated on fun and super high rated on memories because of that. You know, it's not really a fair fight. And this one, maybe it is a bit more subjective than some of my other ones in here that I think are objectively pretty good. But yeah, Deadmines highly rated for me. And then coming in at number 1 is Magister's Terrace. This dungeon is amazing. I actually didn't have the privilege of running this anytime soon because I actually got the mount fairly early on into Burning Crusade when it came out, at least when Magister's Terrace came out. I got the mount pretty quickly. I was very lucky in that way to get that mount that some people still need, frankly. And so the fact that it has a unique mount definitely matters for me. It's not the be-all, end-all. There's other dungeons that have mounts that did not make this list, but it has a really cool, unique mount. It was just a really cool encounter. It was a lot of like very first-timey things. It felt like a raid almost at the time. It almost felt like, so Return to Kara is a homage to Karzan. Magister's Terrace was like an homage to Sunwell Plateau in that way, and it was cool to see that dynamic between those two. And, you know, the most memorable fight for me will be what is often called the PvP fight. I believe it was a Preach video where he's like, it's not the PvP fight. Well, yes, it is. It is the PvP fight. And it was really cool. And it's the PvP fight, frankly, because if you had a group of people who were really good at PvP, it made the fight a lot easier because of, you know, to dispel certain things, to re-CC and stuff like that. CC was important anyways, even in PvE back then. But obviously, PvP people are a little bit more apt at keeping up CC and stuff without needing like weak auras and things to tell them what to do. So if you had really good PvP players, it was actually a much simpler fight. And I did it with PvP players and I did it with PvE players, and I can definitely say that it was easier when you had PvP oriented people in that fight. And it was not an easy fight to do. So you did have to have some strategy going into it. I did also like that fight because it seemed like every class had a way to make that fight easier or make that fight better. So that was also cool with that fight. I also loved the big arcane guy fight with all the worms in front of it. I loved obviously AoEing all the mana worms in front of it and stuff like that as well. And then the Kale fight was not, you know, the best fight in the dungeon. You know, the PvP fight was better, but it was still cool to fight him. You know, we fought him in the Eye, and now we're fighting him here again, and now he's back in Shadowlands. You know, Kel'Thas will never leave us, apparently. And yeah, it was still a really cool fight if you think about it, like especially because nowadays you kill stuff so fast where you don't really realize how cool the fight was when it was new, where you had to fly around, avoid the birds. The fun factor is high for me because I was still playing a lot with my real life friends back then, and you know, we're all kind of noobs figuring this out together, and that makes for high quality fun. So that all feeds into it together, just like Deadmines in a way. You know, I am biased towards this one a little bit because I was having so much personal fun while I played it, but it is my list after all. And I do think many people do agree that Magister's Terrace is a good dungeon, even if they want to have it number one. So yeah, that's my list for this. If you stuck with me through the whole thing, I do ask you please click subscribe or like on the video because it helps me out so much. And other than that, everybody have a good one.